Well, hello. I'm at Treasure Mountain 7 Research Conference in British Columbia, Canada, and I am Professor Loertscher at the iSchool in San Jose, California, and delighted today to have Alanna and Tim King here with us, who are really experts in design thinking and instructional design. And so I'm going to have them introduce themselves. Alanna?
Hi, I'm Alanna King, and I've been a teacher librarian for over 10 years in the province of Ontario at a secondary school level.
Okay, and Tim?
And my name's Tim King, and I teach computer engineering, and I've been teaching in Ontario for about 20 years in the classroom.
Ah, ha, ha. So I think your specialty and what we're really thinking about today is preparing kids, particularly in high school, for the future careers that they're going to have. And one thing that we notice is that a lot of them are getting onto teams doing major projects. So it's called the project design, developing new drugs, all sorts of fixing systems. Anyway, so the problem is that secondary education really isn't preparing them for that kind of work. So let's just think, what does a career like this start to look like when we call it, project-based instruction, Alanna?
I think that a lot of the times in high school, we don't have capacity to really take students all the way through a design thinking process or engineering process, because we get lost in the details. Things that are involving collaboration are really messy. They're not linear. We can't always exactly predict the ending if we're making that project actually authentic, because to make it authentic means that the students have to learn what is going to go well and what isn't going to go well before they finally find a solution.
And Tim, since you're into technology, what's the role that technology plays in all of this sort of thing that they're going to meet when they get into these careers?
I think one of the mistakes they make in education, I came out of technology and industry before I became a teacher, and it felt like stepping back in time. And the reason that is because education tends to teach technology like it teaches many other subjects in a rote way. You learn A, then B, and you get to C. As Alanna was saying, when you're doing a genuine project, it's a genuine learning opportunity, you don't know what the outcome is. So to set students up on a path like that, where there's a potential for failure, but it could be a very rewarding failure, I think technology and how we use technology should amplify that, not try and hide it. I always thought technology would be a great way to do that, but technology sort of became a great way to amplify worksheets and rote learning. And if we can break away from that, we could really see what technology could do in terms of teaching us real world skills.
Yeah. So give me a couple of examples of some projects that you've been involved in so that the listener can say, oh yes, I understand why this is kind of pushing toward the future.
One of the things that I like to try to get my students to do, if we're doing things on large scales with literature, is to talk about how the person who's writing a story has a context that makes their story unique. And so the context of the person writing needs some exploration, because it might not be familiar immediately to the audience. It could be because the author is a different age, or from a different geographical area, from a different culture, from a different lingual background. And so what I like to do is, if we can, is to collect authentic objects. I call them artifacts. And then we put them together in a gallery, and we explain why we think this artifact signifies an important piece of the context of the book. So that's sort of like gallery, almost like a museum, is a really beautiful collaboration, because every decision needs to be made as a group of what does or does not belong in that space.
Ah, great. Tim, describe a project you do with them.
The biggest project we attempted was our game development program, and nobody else was teaching it. And I had 2 students come forward who said they were self-learning at home. And when we started the project up, we discovered there were a whole bunch of students who were learning it at home because it's new media. It's actually where all the jobs are. The game design industry is much bigger than television, movies, and music all put together now. But no one was teaching it in any high school in Ontario. So I went to the students who had already started the self-taught path they were on and said, what do we do? And they suggested the tools. And so my job as a teacher in that case, I didn't know how Unity, the game engine, worked, but one of my kids did. So I emailed Unity, and as a teacher, I can say, hi, I'm a teacher, whereas a student doesn't have that gravity, right? And Unity could not work quickly enough with us to help us out. Then we found Blender, the 3D modeling program. That's a .org thing. It's given away for free, but it's very complicated. And the same thing happened there. We talked to Blender. We integrated Blender. Students were teaching students, and my job as a teacher, and this is what Alanna and I came to Treasure Mountain this year with, was I started to realize I'm actually the project manager. But I'm not the expert by any means. My students who do the coding in that are far better at scripting game physics and things like that than I'll ever be. So what I need to do is be good at identifying who the talented students are and then making sure they're in a leadership position. So for me, that it becomes an issue of responsibility and organization. And I'm the adult in the room, so I can provide forethought and planning and give them some structure, but then the students provide all of the expertise.
And so when we're thinking about this project work that's so common now in industry, one of the problems is getting a team together. For example, when the iPhone was invented, you had to have advertising people, engineers, marketing. They didn't even have the same language.
Right.
So the problem was getting the team to organize and get the actual job done. So you kind of worked on a system to kind of track, how a project is going, individuals, and talk to us about that.
Well, one of the things that, maybe 2 of the big components that I think are different in terms of where the curriculum is and what the real world experience of work is like now in the year 2022 is the idea that work is precarious. It's based on contracts. And so these specialists that might come together to collaborate might not be the people who had the initial thought for the project, but they're there to do a short-term job as well as they can to sort of initiate milestones that they'd like to achieve and then to structure their work around that. So the other thing that's a really big deal is communication and how transparent that communication is. Everybody wants to have an open plan view of how the project is proceeding at any moment. And so that's when we suggested together the tool Trello, which is sort of a project management system using a very old idea called the Kanban system of simply to do, process work, or this needs to be done still. There's like 3 categories of it's either hasn't been initiated yet, or it's been initiated but it's not done yet, or it's done. There's only 3 things.
Yeah.
So is this a software? Does it cost money?
Well, there's a number of different Kanban systems and digital tools.
Okay.
But the reason we like Trello is because it has a number of different integrations into systems that schools are already using, like the Google Apps for Education system or Microsoft and any number of things like that.
Okay. So what does it actually do? I mean, describe,
So let's say you've got a shopping list and you need to buy milk.
Okay.
Inside the milk card, which you'd make on Trello, you would say, I'm going to go to the grocery store for that. I'm going to check the expiration date. And then
Type of milk.
the type of milk, we have 3 different types of milk in our house. We have, the goat milk. And then that would all go on. That's sort of like the sub-layer, would call that the description of the card. But the card itself is called milk. So once I've gone to the grocery store, I can say that card moves to process, but not until I've purchased it and that milk is at home and in my refrigerator is that card
It goes to the complete
done.
pile, yeah.
And that's called a ticket or something?
Yeah, so it has tickets on it. Kanban is very old. Toyota developed it in the 1940s, 1950s.
Right.
So, and when they did it initially, it was sticky cards on a wall.
Oh.
So all of the people working on the production line could say, okay, we've got so many mufflers coming in.
Yeah.
How are we doing with stock? Mufflers are running low. That moves into the emergency category for resupply. And then everyone could see it. So it was a radically transparent approach, because when Ford and a lot of the other companies were doing their production, it was quite secretive how it was managed. Whereas the Japanese system was radically transparent, and Trello follows that. And the power is every student can see what everybody is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so it's a collaborative tool, and you're moving across the board,
Exactly.
from beginning to end, right?
That's it.
And that's the whole
Individuals have to have accountability. They each have a responsibility, but the overall project is a group project.
Now, you as Tim, as the project manager, what can you pull out of this?
Oh, so much. Because the grade 12s were leading the grade 11s in our case, the grade 12s had to wrangle the management responsibilities. One of my favorite parts of teaching this course is next year your grade 11s become your grade 12s. And the grade 11s would give the grade 12s such a hard time about how disorganized they were and how they didn't communicate enough. And, they were very critical. And then the next year they learned firsthand how difficult it is to manage something effectively. And not in a let's read a book about it way, but in a wow, it has landed on me way.
Right.
So it's really genuine learning. So for me, that's my favorite part of it. Everyone gets to do the work and has to show transparency of work. But when you get into the leadership role, you realize how difficult it is to communicate with people, like Alanna was saying, and clarify responsibilities and see things through, and how you deal with all different people with different attitudes and approaches. It's really difficult.
But you can see this as a project manager on data.
Yeah.
You can watch this happen.
And Trello shows you the board, so you can see the board and just see what's going on.
Yeah.
But then it goes one better, and you can go into an automatic charting system, which will show you what's been happening over time. It will show you how many active tickets you've got. There's a great example we'll show tomorrow, where students in one of the projects had a giant pile of incomplete tickets with only a week to go in the project. The other project in the class, almost no incomplete tickets. Everything was on its way to finished. So one showed healthy data, and the other one showed a crisis.
Yeah, and that happens in the real world,
Absolutely,
right?
it
Exactly.
does. Absolutely, it does. But I think that in a system or in a project that doesn't have that transparent documentation, you might not find out until three minutes before the deadline that this is in crisis.
Surprise.
But because it's transparent now, we can address the crisis much earlier.
Yeah.
And so you can do intervention strategies as the teacher and mentor and through the project manager.
In that case, we were in our first COVID lockdown, and what I didn't know was the project lead in the in crisis group was working 60 hours a week at the grocery store.
Wow.
And he hadn't told anyone because he was just trying to do it all himself. And he's looking after a single mom at home. He's the only source of income. I didn't know any of this, but the data uncovered it, so I could have a direct chat with him, find out what was going on, and then help.
That's right.
Which otherwise it would have just been a crash where a whole bunch of people get a bad mark, and what a tragedy that would have been.
There you go.
And you know what's also amazing is that because of the data, and maybe because there were multiple groups working on two different projects, there's a little bit of healthy competition because it's so transparent, and so everybody is suddenly actually raising their own bar to say, oh, well, if they can do that, we can do this,
We can do
right?
that. Yeah.
And there are some students working in both groups because it's all contract work. Everyone's doing tickets, right?
That's right.
So in some cases, people would go back to one of the groups and say, well, they're so much better managed than you are. Can you guys do this? And they would take, could you communicate better? Could you give us more details on what you want in the ticket? Because the other group's doing that. And then, so there's all this cross-pollination going on too between the groups because of that transparency, because everybody can see everything.
So this is quite a different way. You're pulling down adult processes down into the earlier years.
That's right.
So, my son, when I asked him about this, he said, well, project managers, they start about 150,000 a year, and go up from there. So you can imagine being the project director over a new drug, for example, a pandemic drug, for example, you're worth more than 150 grand, right?
Exactly.
So anyway, there's some things. So suppose our listeners wanted to get this started in their school or their district. What's your advice for?
I mean, really, it's like such a transparent way of starting some goal setting. And so the most important thing to do would be to have someone who is really experienced at managing large and messy projects.
Yeah.
Really. And I mean, you could do this face to face in sort of an older fashioned style with sticky notes on the wall. But when we went to remote learning back and forth during the pandemic, we didn't have the luxury of communicating only face to face. We needed to be able to pivot. And because we could pivot to digital using this system, we were able to see all sorts of things and incorporate different experts or even different people to guide us as we went. You really need to have someone who is great at literacy, who's a great teacher and has worked with kids in a number of different situations, and someone who understands when the process needs to slow down or go faster, when you can iterate something or you can go a little deeper on something.
And we say there's probably a person right there that does this all the time.
Yeah.
If they realize it. And that's
right.
The credentialed school librarian
Absolutely.
of all people.
Absolutely. The school librarian deals with every subject in the school, every resource type, and can manage all sorts of students and student groups in order to make that happen.
Central school projects, too, tend to fall to the librarian. So in the case that we were having trouble sort of focusing our school around a motto and a mission statement and things like that. And having the librarian on board with that, because the librarian speaks to everyone. They really are the hub of the school, right? Yeah. And all of the teachers lean on them. So being able to reach out and touch all of those classrooms. So if you wanted a way to kick off a Trello, a librarian in a school, creating a Trello of maybe next steps we could take to improve the school culture, the school environment.
Is it that hard to learn?
It's very easy. I will show everybody tomorrow, and Alanna and I think in 25 minutes everybody can be fluent on it.
Oh, wow.
But I think that the librarian also has that unique perspective to be able to notice or anticipate when the crisis is going to hit, rather than the teacher who is busy with 1,000 different things and can't focus. The librarian will be able to zero right in on where those trouble problems might be ahead of the actual crisis.
And the transparency helps with that.
Yeah, it really does. Plus the documentation points about being able to see the data and then analyze it. I think a teacher librarian would be especially exceptional at that.
So as you folks have seen this actually work with kids, what's the bottom line on this whole thing, this whole idea?
I think the power in it is, first of all, project management, like you said, is this really powerful career opportunity that we really don't cover in schools at all. So introducing students to career management is a real pathway potential. This is something you could do where you could make a comfortable living at, and it's an important job. There's that piece to it. I think having the digital aspect to it gives students and staff resiliency in case of adverse effects. We're just coming out of COVID here, so we're still really conscious of the fact of how poorly we managed it.
And I think that one thing we can be certain of with our future and this future of the students is that the future will be uncertain and is going to require a lot of innovation. And to have a safe foundation like a Kanban board, a place where people can communicate and rely on some structure. That's going to be an essential part of being able to adapt and be flexible as we go forward into those innovation areas.
That's just a super idea. I really thank you, experts, for this conversation, because I think it pushes really the envelope of a lot of teaching and learning in the school that is absolutely essential. And I encourage everyone to pay attention and maybe contact you folks for assistance or help or whatever. So thank you, thank you, thank you. It's been a wonderful conversation to be with you.
It has. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.